Travel.radio.
So, as we said at the top end of the show, I've got a number of my team joining me today to talk about their adventures with Gadventures, and I'm really delighted to have on the show today Gio, who looks after our digital marketing. Gio, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. All seems very odd doing these little interviews on a radio station when we see each other every day at work. But anyway, so we're about to talk about your trip to Africa. So talk us a little bit, 30 seconds overview of your itinerary.
Yes, for sure. So the trip I did was an 8-day trip. It started in Johannesburg and then goes all the way up to Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. It is an 18 to 30 trip and it is mostly camping, although the first night was in a hotel. We visit like loads of like rhino sanctuaries, Chobe National Park, the Okavango Delta, and the likes of it. We do see one of the Planetera projects, so that was really cool as well. And yeah, we end up in Victoria Falls.
Excellent. Now that Planetera project, talk to our listeners about it.
Yes, so it's a community of mostly women, and they help the community. They cook for the travelers. So we go, they cook like this amazing, incredible food. They like, show us some songs, some like little like traditions, and some like really weird food that we've never tried before. I remember the woman that was leading, it's called Linda. And she was just like saying how they have helped like, single mothers or mothers that like just cannot take like full charge of the economical situation in there. And they come, they apply, and then they give them like some economical support.
Marvelous. So good. So good. So what are your top 3 highlights from that tour?
Yeah, I would definitely say my top one would be the camping in the Okavango Delta. That was incredible. It's really, really in the middle of the wilderness. Like it's like a proper camping in Africa experience. Just everything. You stay with the local people in there. They sing by the fire. They cook for you. It's like full on camping. Like in the night, they are like, don't come out. Because they like literally a lion or a hippo can be there, so if you want to go to the bathroom you really can't. So that would absolutely be my top one. The next one would be like just the animals, just like obviously all the safaris. I remember everyone in the group was like really obsessed with like the big 5s, and they really wanted to see lions and the cheetah. For me, it was just the elephants. Like, I just wanted to see elephants. And we saw loads of them in Chobe, like hundreds of them. So that was like a top one for me too. And then there is another part in Chobe where you take a river cruise and you go there by the sunset and you see these animals just from the river. So they are bathing and like the sunset is there, and you really see them just at the end of their day, just relaxing by the river. And that was incredible too.
I can imagine, yeah. And did you, on that tour, because you say it was an 18 to 30s tour, and was that on the Lando?
Yes, the Lando.
Yeah, so those of you listening that are thinking, right, what's he on about, the Lando? So Lando is the truck that we purpose-built as Gadventures, specifically for our safari tours down in Africa for our 18 to 30-somethings travel style, which is, I mean, listen, you were on it. It is amazing, that truck.
Yes, it really has everything. It's so comfy, like you can plug your phone. It has water. It has like security system, so you can leave your things there while camping or while going into anything. It's really, really good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we launched that about 4 or 5 years ago. It is I've been to South Africa. I've seen our Lando and I've seen other trucks that take people out on safari, and nobody has got a vehicle like the Lando. It is very special. And what I love about it is the fact that we built it from the ground up specifically with feedback from our travellers in mind. So it is a great experience. Now, I want to ask you a question. What's the one thing that you learned from that trip that most people wouldn't know about Africa?
So when I stayed in the Okavango Delta, like as I said, there is like a lot of time to talk to the people there. And I really went on about like the questions. I did ask about, their traditions, like their weddings, like what you do when you like propose, all those things. I think it's so important because, that's not in the books. And even if you do the research, those are the little things that you don't really get to hear till you talk to someone there, how they see the world, how they see even us, right, as travelers. So I think that's the part that people don't know about Africa, like the little like things about these little tribes really, and how they've had, for example, to move because of the floodings and how they just manage that. And actually they have like a chief in their tribe and they have to ask for permission to move. And all these things that you really don't hear and don't know because it's never in the news. So all these things, I think those are the things that I learned.
Yeah. Sounds amazing. Now, food, big thing. Say this to everybody that's been on in the last couple of weeks, but food is a big part of going away, especially with Gadventures, because you get that cultural immersion. So what's your favorite dish that you had while you were on that tour?
Yes, so that was again in the Planetera community. They did this pap, which apparently is like a thing that I've never tried before. It's a sort of a porridge or a polenta kind of thing. So you mix that with like a lot of other like sauces and stuff. There was one that was with herbs and peanut sauce that I just can't remember the name, but it was just so good. Like it was so good. So that would be my favorite one.
Which is quite amazing because I know you well, Gio, and you're not a massive foodie.
I'm not a massive foodie, but I was like so excited with that one.
That's fantastic. You're more about, right, I want to go and see the place. I'm not, food.
Yeah, I don't have time for food. No. The other travelers did try, because this is very typical. They're the caterpillars. I wasn't that bold, so I
couldn't imagine you eating a caterpillar, I must admit. Now, photos, really big. I mean, listen, on a trip like that, the photos that you took must have been unbelievable. But what's the one photo for you from that trip that stands out, and why does it stand out for you?
So there is a moment again, and I'm just obsessed, right, with this place. It's the Okavango, and it's we were going in the Macoros, which is this canoe, and that's how they call them, and they are like taking us through the canals, because if you go into the open water, let's say, the hippos are there, so they are like quite dangerous.
Yeah.
So there is this moment, and there is this sunset, and wait, I'm going to share my screen because it's difficult. And then you could just see like the backlight of the sunset, and then the people, and like I just remember the sound of all the insects and the hippos at the back, and it's just quite a picture.
So obviously all of our listeners, you can't see this photo that Gio's just shared with me. So Gio, I'm going to ask you to send me that photo. I'll put it up on my Twitter account, which is Brian R. Young. You can follow me. And I'll have this picture put up on social media so you can see it, because that is a stunning photo, and I can understand why that evokes such great memories. It's amazing. So get on my Twitter account, Brian R. Young, and have a look at this photo, because I'm going to put it up for you guys to all see. Well, listen, Gio, it's been lovely having you on the radio show, and I'll see you in the office next week.
Yes, thank you so much.
Cheers, Gio. Next one on my team to join me, you've heard his voice a few times over the last couple of months. It is Stu Darnley. He's our national sales manager. Stu, how are you?
Oh, very well, Brian. Thank you for thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, always a pleasure to have my team on the radio show. Now, you have done an amazing trip to Antarctica. Is that not right?
Oh, it's highlight. It's up there with the birth of my kids, but don't tell my wife.
Old statement.
But yeah, life-changing experience. Yeah, been very fortunate.
Okay, so give us a 30-second overview of your tour then, Stu.
30 seconds, right. Well, for those that don't know, you depart from Ushuaia down the bottom of South America, not just a club in Ibiza, Ushuaia, the original one down the bottom there. And we set sail across the Drake Passage. Takes about a day and a half. It can be shaky. It can be lakey. That's why they call it the Drake Lake or Shake. But that's your baptism of fire. You get down to Antarctica. And honestly, at that point, for about 2 weeks, you're in a different world. Like, I can't stress that enough. You're in a completely different world. You know, you're cut off from civilization. And besides a few different kind of scientific bases that we visit, or historical bases for the British or other nations, really, you're just in this entirely different realm. And when you come back from it, having not been to space, but you hear about people saying they go to space, they come back for a new love for the world. Yeah, I think anyone that goes to Antarctica comes back with this newfound love of the world and protecting it. It's a very special place.
Sounds amazing. So I'm going to ask you, what's your 3 sort of highlights from the tour?
From the tour? Well, I mean, the wildlife, I know that's obviously the simple one, but the wildlife is just so abundant. And, you know, I guess within that, if you go to Africa and you go on a safari, then quite often, you know, they'll radio each other and they'll say the lions are over there. Because the lions are chilling, you know, they've just caught a kill or something like that. And you'll find everyone kind of congregates around. But of course, in Antarctica, the wildlife is just so abundant and kind of unpredictable that's the other thing that's so great about it. So you could be out in the zodiacs and you'll suddenly come across a leopard seal that's chasing some penguins. And then you're in these zodiacs with about 10 people. And at the end of the day, when you're, sharing stories over a drink, you'll find someone else had a completely different experience that day. And it's of course nature personified. You know, it's completely unpredictable, and that's what makes every trip completely different and unique for everyone.
Yeah. And what other highlights for you?
Camping. You might not think about camping in Antarctica. I would say it's not the most comfortable night's sleep I've had. You know, obviously it's cold. But we had John Kernan, one of the expedition experts, and he was there pointing at all the stars for us with a laser pointer. Of course, down there you've got no light pollution, and if the weather's nice and clear, then of course the stars are some of the best you'll ever see. So I didn't do a lot of sleep that night. I was taking photos of the stars and hearing about what this constellation was and that one was. But that will certainly stay with me as a very special experience.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Do you know, well, listen, you climbed Kili with me. And there was one night when I can't remember what part, it was quite late on into the tour. And I got up at about, 2:00 in the morning because I need to make my way through all the campsite and everything to get to that portaloo that we'd carried up with us. And as I'm trying to make my way out of the tent, and it was freezing, I remember Leah saying to me, right. I'm like, what's the matter with you? What are you doing up? She's like, look up. And I think, what's she on about anyway? And I looked up and it was just the most breathtaking view of the stars I'd ever seen. So if it gets any better than that, then that just blew my mind, because that was my experience of seeing, amazing view of the stars as such.
Yeah, some of the best star experiences are the middle of the night when you're going to the bathroom.
Yes. And bless her, she hadn't stopped me, I probably wouldn't have concentrating on not tripping over the guy ropes and stuff at that time. Oh dear. And is there another highlight for you that stands out?
I mean, I've heard people say this, and I think beforehand I thought it was a bit silly, but it's the color blue.
Right, okay.
And when you're down there, there's all these different types of ice, and there's glaciers, and there's, icebergs, and you've never seen a different range of colors of blue, in your everyday life until you're down there. And it sounds very deep, but to look at an iceberg and see all the different ranges of blues and colors as the light hits it is really something quite special, which is, something you don't normally get it in other parts of the world.
No, I can well imagine. Now, food obviously is a big part of that tour, and having been on the expedition myself, not down to Antarctica unfortunately, but I do know the food is excellent. Do you want to talk, to our listeners about food on the ship?
Yeah, absolutely. So normally in the morning we've got a buffet. So obviously all the different choices. We cater for vegetarians, vegans, gluten intolerant. We've got all that covered, of course. Lunchtime's often a buffet as well, and then we've got a sit-down meal in the evening. But what will surprise listeners is, if you think of, you've gone to the grocery store, you've gone to the shops, and you've put that food in your fridge for, a week or so, and then your vegetables and such start to maybe deteriorate a little. Honestly, the feedback we were getting from other travelers was, how is the lettuce still so crisp? After 10 days. And they've obviously got this amazing setup with the fridges and freezers on board that they keep rolling out food. And we can't go and get more food when we're down there. We have to pack, we have to bring everything with us. And for the salad in particular to obviously still be so crisp and fresh after, the 13th day is, something quite surprising in itself. But a very short highlight is that more often than not, we'll use the back deck of the ship, and we'll have a barbecue outside. Might roll out the ice cream as well, and that's really nice to be sitting outside as you're cruising past, the scenery, which is certainly something quite memorable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, I know you love to take photos. You're our designated cameraman as such when we climbed Killy together. And I know, you've got an amazing array of photos, but in that collection from that tour, there must be one that stands out because it just evokes like an emotion or a memory. What is it? Talk to us about it.
I'm going to say there's two, but just really quickly. So I happened to catch a moment of a leopard seal battling a penguin. Now, it's the kind of picture that has to come with a warning because it's nature at its absolute rawest, and the listeners will be happy that we can't show you the pictures, but if you can actually capture that interaction where one animal is taking the life of another, it's very, very powerful. But the other one, which I touched on before, is actually the stars. So I was up quite late that night while we were camping. I noticed someone come out of their tent to actually look up at the stars, and it's obviously very late, so didn't want to wake anyone. So I didn't call out to them, but they stayed still long enough for my exposure, which was about 30 seconds, and got this beautiful photo of the Milky Way, the tent, and them standing outside. Wow. And then I showed them in the morning, and they were made up. And the thing is, afterwards, everyone said, "Oh, well, I'll take that picture because it could have been me." Like, you can't tell who it is. It's the back of someone's head outside a tent. But that was, I think, quite magical to see someone, in that desolate environment in front of the beautiful stars.
No, absolutely. Well, listen, Stu, been a pleasure talking about your trip on the expedition, and you're on in the second half of the show. So we'll speak to you again in a little bit.
Excellent. Thank you.
Now, some of you that were listening in last week will remember Casey joined us last week to talk about her local living experience in Sorrento. I've got her back on the show this week. How are you, Casey?
Doing well. Doing very well, Brian.
Good. So we're going to talk about your tour in Costa Rica. So give us a quick overview of the tour itself.
Okay, well, the tour I did is Costa Rica Wellness. So it's part of our new wellness collection of trips, where there's a sort of heavy focus on nourishment, movement, mindfulness. So a little bit of a different experience than the traditional Costa Rica experience. It's an 8-day tour from San Jose return, and it is upgraded accommodation as well. So a little bit of a higher level of hotel stays and eco lodges there. And you cover a lot of ground. So you go from jungle to beach, so La Fortuna, Playa Carrera, and back to San Jose.
Nice. And in terms of the wellness, just give our listeners a flavour of some of the things that you would have done, specifically related to wellness as such.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of yoga on the trip. So yoga pretty much every single day, as well as some more active experiences. So we did zip lining. For those who were not up for the zip lining, there was a nice waterfall hike that was offered as an alternative. I took the zip lining because I love a bit of adventure. You do paddleboard yoga, stand-up paddleboarding across Lake Arenal. So yeah, just a really nice mixture. Every day you're doing something active as well as having some downtime and doing some more sort of traditional experiences that you would have in Costa Rica, but also the restaurant options and the food choices are very sort of healthy options. So yeah, a really nice holistic experience.
Nice, sounds great. And your top 3 highlights from that tour?
Zip lining was awesome. So cool, so much fun. It was the first time I'd done it actually. So a little bit nervous at first. They start you off a little bit easier and then it gets more and more difficult until you're doing a Superman over a cabin. But yeah, really awesome. I can't recommend that highly enough. The sunrise yoga on the beach was just spectacular. You know, you're the only people on the beach. It's deserted, like there's, you know, gorgeous sand and the waves sort of crashing in the background. So that was an incredible experience as well. And there's really neat volcanic mud baths and hot springs. So after all that activity and exertion, you can head over there and chillax and get muddy and have a nice sauna and relax in the hot springs.
Nice, yeah. Now, zip lining, as you know, I'm scared of heights, Casey.
Yeah.
So I did, though, tackle a bit of zip lining in South Africa just before the pandemic. And you'll be proud to know that I did 3 of the zip lines, but as it was starting to get more precarious and higher, I actually was offered the opportunity if I wanted to bottle out at that point. And yeah, I did.
Yeah. At least you gave it a go.
Absolutely, yes. Flying on a string is not for me, I realised, but it was good fun of what I did. Now, one thing that you learned that most people wouldn't know from that tour.
But paddle boarding isn't that hard. It's probably the one thing I learned. I was a little bit nervous about it, especially seeing we were doing some yoga on the paddle board. And I actually haven't tried it since, but it's actually not that difficult. So if anyone's sort of, you know, hesitant to give it a go, my recommendation is just try. It's super fun. I didn't fall off once.
Yeah, blimey. That's interesting because paddleboarding is massive now, certainly in the UK. I mean, most of the team at Gadventures, I think, are off paddleboarding at the weekend. And one of your colleagues in the PR department, I remember trying to do a handstand on a paddleboard in Croatia one time. But anyway, we digress. So, food. What was your favourite dish on that tour?
So the favorite dish was a surprising one for me because I am not even a vegetarian, let alone a vegan. But one of the restaurants we went to was called Love Burger, and they did these vegan hamburgers, and they were phenomenal. So yeah, way beyond the sort of traditional rice and beans you might associate Costa Rica with. There's some really, really top-notch food there.
That does sound good, yes. And we love a photo whilst on tour. So what's your favourite photo and why from that tour?
I think it's the photo of me with one of our group doing an upside down maneuver during aerial yoga with the beach in the background. Super fun. I hadn't tried aerial yoga before either. That is hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'd have paid good money to see that.
Well, on Instagram.
Lovely to have you back, but you're going to come back and join us in the second hour of the show. So until then, I'll speak to you in a little bit.
Look forward to it.
Glad to welcome you back, Stu, to the second half of the show. Now, we're going to talk about your tour down to Bhutan. So give us a quick overview of the itinerary.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bhutan, for those that don't know, tiny little nation, about 500,000 people in the Himalayas. And one of the most remarkable things is it's nestled between the 2 largest populations in the world. It's nestled between India and China, but it just maintains its own unique identity. So I did the 10-day Bhutan adventure, starts and finishes near the capital, and really takes in a lot of the highlights of the trip, together with a couple of walks, including a walk which actually goes up near the Tiger Leaping Monastery as well. And yeah, it was a great little introduction to the country, and that was back in 2019. It was a fantastic trip.
And 3 highlights from that for our listeners.
Well, I'll start off, and by the way, any listeners who are quite adverse to flying, maybe turn the radio down for the next 10 seconds. But one of the first highlights is the airport and the approach. You know, there's only about 10 to 12 people kind of authorized or qualified to fly into the capital. It's quite an interesting approach through the mountains as you come in. You know, if you get left side, right side of the plane, if you're quite fortunate, you might see the Himalayas, you might see Everest. But then when you land, you're just landing in essentially what feels like it could just be a farming valley. You know, it's not heavily built up. There's a beautiful airport. And yeah, that first experience of arriving, you know, at the airport, that might not always be the highlight of a country, but that's certainly up there as one of my top 3.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And a couple more?
Yeah, so another one that might be surprising for some listeners is the national dress. So you think of like, okay, you think of Scotland, you think of kilts, you think of Japan, you think of, kimonos or things like that. In Bhutan, all the locals, all the people that live there wear their national dress all the time.
Right.
So that means when you show up, you're not walking around and seeing someone in a branded hoodie or someone in sweatpants. It's a bit like being transported back to a time when those other clothes didn't exist. And that, coupled with the fact that all the buildings look very traditional, they're all designed in the traditional way. I have described it to some people as, if you could take out the power poles, it would look like it did, 100 years ago. And I think that, touching on before about being so close to some superpowers of the world, obviously with big cultures like China and India, for them to maintain their own identity and not be running around wearing clothing from different brands, I think is really refreshing and makes you feel, sometimes you go to a country and you think, oh, there's a little bit of America here, there's a little bit of England, there's a little bit of China. This feels like it's 100% Bhutan.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's the beauty of traveling for me, is, I do get disappointed when I go somewhere and you go to like a built up area and then suddenly there's a Zara and there's a, and it just suddenly you're like, hang on a minute, I feel like I'm back home again. But yeah. And any other last one highlight?
So it's actually the town of Punakha has a very unusual shrine, and it's linked to fertility. And for that reason, there's wooden phalluses hung outside all the local homes. And when you arrive there, there's lots of these different objects for sale with faces on them, and some are crafted into aeroplanes. You can Google it for images. I won't describe beyond that. But it is actually on a, I guess, more serious note, it's a fertility pilgrimage. So, those that have been trying to have children will go there. They'll walk around this building holding one of these large phalluses in the hope that that's going to, bring them good luck for having children. So there's somewhat comical nature, but also a very cultural nature to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say the one thing that you learned whilst you were on that tour that most of our listeners wouldn't know about Bhutan?
Yeah, well, listeners may know that it costs about $250 a day to visit Bhutan. Now, that's a cost initiated by the government. And I'd always heard that and thought, okay, well, that kind of makes it a bit expensive, but, they'll have their reasons. But what I found out while I was there is they use that money to fund their national health care and their education. So they're very clever. They've said, we've got this beautiful little country. We're going to regulate how many people come in. We're going to say they have to pay $250 a day, and that will cover your accommodation, transport, meals, and a guide. So everything's covered. When you're there, you're not actually paying any money unless you want beer or wine. And off the back of that, some of that $250 a day is going to help top up their national healthcare and education. They're very clever. And then they're able to provide all this free healthcare and education because they've only got about 500,000 people or so. And tourists are funding that, which I think is very clever.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Now, food. So, we're big foodies at Gadventures. So what's your favourite dish there? Try and describe it for our listeners.
I've never been really one for spicy food, but since I met my wife, she's introduced me to it a bit more. But over there, one of their famous meals, it's almost a national icon, is chili cheese. The local name would be Emma Dutchie. And it kind of comes from, Emma meaning chili and Dutchie meaning cheese. And it's served with almost every meal. Some versions are a bit spicier than others, but just imagine you've taken a bunch of kind of melted cheese and mixed it in with chilies. I'm not doing it justice. It's more complicated than that. But the first taste is always a bit fiery, but then you get past that and there's kind of a creamy, salty, fruity flavor. So more often than not, you'd have your main and you'd have that as the starter or just have it on the side, which is very nice.
I can imagine that all over a portion of chips. Sounds
yeah.
And again, talking about photography, because I think photography always for me is an important part of any tour that anyone goes on, because it is that bit that you can look back, it evokes memories and emotions. So what's the photo from that tour and why?
Well, for anyone that heard my overview of Antarctica in the picture, it's actually very similar. So up late one night, going to the bathroom, at Bumdruck Camp, which was about 3,800 meters. And, you know, when it's a nice clear night, you get to see the stars. So walked out, saw this absolutely stunning stars in front of me, managed to get my camera, you know, put it on the ground, put it on a long exposure and capture a shot of the stars kind of above the Himalayas. So it's always very special. You know, you're lying in bed thinking, I'm a bit cold. I'd really rather not get out and go to the bathroom. But sometimes if the weather's good, you've got, you know, a bit of a reward there waiting for you.
Lovely. Well, Stu, thank you very much for joining us in the second hour of the show again. And always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
So, Casey, welcome back. We're in the second half of the show this Saturday. Now, we want to talk to you about a great trip that you've done with Gadventures, and it is the Camino de Santiago. So talk to us about the itinerary of that tour.
That's right. Well, I mean, it's quite a well-known tour. A lot of people will know the Camino as like a pilgrimage, which can actually take more than a month. The tour that we offer is a shorter version of that. It's 115 kilometers over 8 days. So you start in Sevilla and you finish in Santiago, but that 115 kilometers is enough to gain you your Compostela, so your certification that you have completed the Camino.
And in terms of, so, you know, it's quite a long distance, even over 8 days. What sort of physicality or physical shape do you need to be in for that?
I mean, it sounds like a lot. I think it was actually easier than I anticipated. Some of the days are longer than others. Some days you're doing 20K and sometimes you're doing between 8 and 10. There are a few hills, but for the most part, it's relatively flat. So you don't need to be ridiculously fit. I mean, definitely trying to, you know, got in a few decent walks just to get those muscles ready for the endurance that's going to be required. But I was actually very surprised about how much time you had at the end of the day. So you're not sort of walking from dawn till dusk. You actually leave a little bit later. So the traditional pilgrims will leave very early in the morning to cover as much distance as possible. We skip that part and we leave after breakfast, so it's a little bit less busy on the trail.
More civilized. Yeah. And in terms of like your highlights, what are your top sort of 3 highlights from the tour?
I think that, I mean, just the beautiful vistas, you know, you're just walking and there's, you know, you see so many different small towns and, you know, ways of local life. You're not in the big cities. It's very traditional. It's just, you know, you're walking through dense forests and then open fields and farms. So just being able to take in what, you know, the Spanish countryside is really like.
Yeah. And any other highlights?
I have to say the Galician food and wine. The food is mind-blowing. The wine is fantastic. So you definitely have earned it and you can enjoy to your heart's content at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, some of my favourite food is Galician food for sure, yeah, especially the tapas. And one thing that you learned that most people wouldn't know about that tour?
So you actually collect stamps as you go. So there's different points along the trail, along the Camino, and you'll get a stamp on your piece of paper that you have to show at the end in order to get your certification. So I didn't know that. It adds a bit of fun to the experience, and yeah, it's a little bit of a talking point between you and your fellow pilgrims as well.
I'm sure it is, yeah. Now, we spoke about food already, but what was your favourite dish from that trip?
Okay, we went to this phenomenal restaurant in Santiago at the end of the trip called Abastos 2.0. And one of the sort of delicacies that they had there are these percebes, so these barnacles. And as the story goes, they're actually divers have to go down and get these things. So they're not cheap, they're absolutely delicious, and even better washed down with a nice glass of cold Albreño.
Oh, there we go. Hey, talking my language now, you are. And photos, we've said, you know, on numerous ones of these, and your one from earlier, but what's your favourite photo and what memories does it evoke for you?
I have 2, but they're from the same moment. The first one is our group at the end. We're in Santiago. We're just ecstatic that we have finished this walk. You know, we've formed incredible bonds over the course of the time. And if you look down, there's a different photo, and that's my somewhat tired feet on the plaque in Santiago, marking the finish point for our pilgrimage.
Marvellous, yeah. Well, listen, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show this week, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other face to face at some point soon.
Yeah, so great to be talking about travel again.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, without a doubt. Excellent. Well, listen, thank you very much, Casey. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, Brian.
Changing the world just by having the time of your life sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? But when you travel with Gadventures, that's exactly what you're doing. Our small group tours were built to directly benefit the people and places they visit. So on top of having an incredible, immersive, one-of-a-kind travel experience, you'll also be doing your part to make the world a better place. Ask your travel agent or visit gadventures.com to learn more about the power of your travel plans and to book your next life-changing experience.